the rhythm of Shakespeare's language, which is the rhythm of a heartbeat.
Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's just 5 feet.
Yep.
What you did. And it's how we start every workshop is we make what's called a heartbeat. Hello. We make a heartbeat together.
Mm.
And we sing the word hello. And it's where we all meet because the heartbeat, the rhythm of a heartbeat is primal. We're hardwired for it. It's the first sound feeling we experience before we're even born. So everyone can feel it and connect into it.
That was the voice of actor, director, playwright, and associate professor Kevin McClatchy. And it is my absolute delight to have him on as the guest of this episode of the Page and Stage podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jason Cannon. Before diving into my conversation with Kevin, a brief Page and Stage plug. This podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. Go check out pageandstage.art. That's pageandstage.art. And there you'll find not just every previous episode of this podcast, but also the archive of my weekly newsletter, which is full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. You can sign up for free and get the newsletter directly into your inbox each Friday, as well as every new podcast right into your inbox every other Monday. Everything is free, but if you find value in all this storytelling content, you can financially support me at pageandstage.art or forward any of the newsletters or podcasts to other story-loving friends, or hire me outright as your personal story coach. So, if you are working on a memoir, play, or speech, I cannot wait to hear your story. Now, let me tell you a bit more about my awesome guest, Kevin McClatchy. Kevin is an associate professor and the head of acting and directing in the Department of Theater, Film, and Media Arts at The Ohio State University. He's been a professional actor for more than 30 years, working on stage and screen nationally and internationally. Since 2015, Kevin has been the director of the OSU Shakespeare and Autism Project, which uses Shakespeare theater games to engage autistic individuals in strengthening self-expression and social and communicative skills. In 2016, Kevin created the Shakespeare and Veterans Initiative, which uses active ensemble workshops to engage veterans, military family members, and VA counselors in communalizing experiences, storytelling, and strengthening communication skills. Last year, Kevin was named the Ohio State Artist Laureate for 2024-25. His Artist Laureate activities this year entail traveling across Ohio to offer Shakespeare and Autism, and also perform his solo show about a Special Forces veteran, Scrap Heap. His tour is about to culminate with a performance of Scrap Heap at the National Veterans Museum and Memorial in Columbus. Here we go with my conversation with Kevin McClatchy. Okay, I am here today with the great Kevin McClatchy, who I've only had like 5 minutes of true conversation with in person, but it was one of those like little kismet things. I was in Columbus doing a tour stop for Last Out, and Kevin, you were in the audience that evening for Last Out, and you spoke really eloquently in the talkback about your work also with veterans and telling veteran stories. And we're going to talk about your show, your one-man show for sure. But thank you so much for joining me today from Columbus.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Jason. And it was kismet that Last Out came to Columbus and that it landed at OSU and that I was able to see it and then have a chance to talk to you afterwards and talk to Scott Mann and talk to Michael Broderick as well, because it was incredibly moving performance. And as is usually the case, performance was great, but it really just primed the soil for the talkback, which was profound, and both things were memorable. And I think that was a testament to just the communal space that you guys provided through the performance.
Awesome. Yeah, that's just the way it is. I mean, I know you know, but talkbacks often are where the real gold gets mined out.
Yeah, man.
So we're going to talk more about your show and Veterans in the Arts. you were I need to mention this real quick. You have been named the Ohio State Artist Laureate for
Yeah.
2024-25. We're going to talk about that too, because I know it directly ties to a lot of the work you do. But
Yeah.
first, the most important thing I'm going to ask you today. I have seen every episode of The X-Files. My dad and my brother and I watched it together every Friday, and it's on your bio. So I
Yeah.
need to know which episode of episodes of The X-Files you were on.
Yeah. It was one episode, and it was Via Negativa.
Oh, that one's so good.
Yeah. And yeah, it's what's cool is I'm literally the first image you see. I fall asleep on a stakeout as an FBI agent, and the guy with the third eye, who's Kurt, who levitates and does all sorts of crazy stuff. He infiltrates my dreams, and I get killed with a medieval axe, which was phenomenal. Yeah,
Oh
phenomenal.
my gosh. You mentioned Michael Broderick, who was in Last Out. He was a guest on this podcast just a few weeks ago. And yeah, we went through he's been killed on screen multiple times. I think
Yeah. Yeah, it's a running joke. It's like a drinking game in my friend circle, like the over under how long my character will stay alive. Yeah.
That's awesome. And also, did I read this right? You did your undergrad at Washington and Lee. That's in Virginia, right?
Yeah, Washington and Lee, Lexington.
Yeah, that's where my brother lives. He lives right there in Buena Vista.
Oh,
I saw that on your bio too, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've walked that campus. We played the ultimate frisbee course right there around Washington and Lee.
Yeah. It was amazing. WNL was great. Obviously, we're smack up against the VMI, which Virginia Military Institute, and that was just an incredibly fascinating dynamic in good and bewildering ways. I played basketball at WNL, and we would scrimmage with the VMI basketball team, and they were Division I, we were Division III, but it was a great little community. And then there were so many things that were universes apart, in terms of the way VMI's traditions and WNL's traditions and the way people just sort of went about their daily lives, which was really interesting.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about your actor origin story, because you've been a professional working actor, TV, film, stage for like 30 years. But I'm wondering now too, with your work with veterans, having gone to school at Washington and Lee, right next to Virginia Military Institute, is there military also in your background? What is Kevin's kind of actor origin story? And then feel free to kind of let that ripple into, did going to school in Lexington kind of influence some of your later work with veterans?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And yeah, so the origin story is I went to WNL, and I was a journalism and English major, and did not ever go into the theater department or see a show. And one of my roommate was doing theater at the time, and I think they did a production of The Iceman Cometh, and I still didn't go see it.
Oh no.
Yeah, and I in hindsight, it was clearly a case of deep, deep, deep denial. But in the moment, my roommate was like, "What are you doing? Why can't you just come? I go to your basketball games." And he got mad at me, and I was like, he was right, but I didn't really make sense of it till obviously later. But the experience at WNL was incredible in that, it's a lot of times you go, I talk to my students now, you go to undergrad and sometimes grad school, but usually undergrad, you go there to sort of figure out who you really are. And that's exactly what happened with me. My first time away from home, I was playing college athletics. I had that responsibility. I discovered 3/4 of the way through my undergrad that journalism, working for the local TV affiliate was not going to be the thing that got me out of bed for the next 30 years. And, when I first realized that, I was like, wow, I wish I could have realized this, freshman year, but
Right.
it happened when it happened. And I finished it out, and, I learned a lot about self-discipline and, taking responsibility, but it didn't really, being near VMI didn't really influence the work I ultimately did with the veterans or Scrap Heap. That was more a family and friends connection from Philly, which I can tell you about in a minute. But leaving WNL, I went back to Philly and started working for a sports marketing company. And I was like, okay, well, this is cool because I love sports, and I'm a good writer, and I get to edit some highlights and stuff like that. And we had the guy who was my boss is a fascinating guy. He had been the general manager for the Philadelphia Eagles,
Whoa.
during the Leonard Toews era, and the Leonard Toews era was in late 70s and bled into like the early 80s with Dick Vermeil and sort of like the Invincible movie with Vince Papale, that era. And Jim was the GM, and he took a wild ride with Leonard Toews, who was just he was unique, right? He was a one man rat pack, and, but then Jim started this sports marketing company, and while he was the GM, he was instrumental with a gentleman named Kent Hill, I believe his name was. He was a player for the Eagles whose child was sick and at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. And he was saying, "Man, I'm sleeping in the hospital every night, and it's really difficult for us to navigate this." And out of that conversation, those initial conversations, Ronald McDonald House was born. And the first Ronald McDonald House was in Philly. So Jim was instrumental in establishing that first Ronald McDonald House. And Ronald McDonald Children's Charities was one of our clients, Major League Baseball Alumni Association. So we were doing this really sort of impactful civic engagement. And I think that planted the seeds of some of the things that I've done later with the veterans community and with Shakespeare and Autism. But, sports marketing wasn't going to be the thing that got me out of bed.
For 30 years either, right?
So I loved, just like so many people, I loved movies and television, loved them. I remember seeing a movie called Coming Home, which was a Vietnam movie. And I think it was like the first R-rated movie I had ever seen.
Wow.
You had to go to the theater to actually see it. And I came out just blown away by the impact that John Voight's acting and Jane Fonda's acting and Bruce Dern's acting had on me. And I was like, that's, that kind of storytelling. And I didn't know it was storytelling. I was just like, I just had this experience. And I knew that I wanted to have that kind of experience, and it just sort of built, but I didn't really have the wherewithal to plant my flag and say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's what the college experience helped me realize. And that same guy whose plays I refused to go to,
Right.
to his credit, he's like, just come, if this is what you want to do, you're staring 24 years old, 25 years old down. It's like one of those mileposts. I was in a relationship that was either going to end or I was going to get married. And I just quit my job and told my family that I was going to move to New York and be an actor. And they all collectively looked like they'd gotten a shot of Novocaine. They were just like, they couldn't, and rightly so, because it wasn't anything I ever talked about. So the guy Jim Murray, who was my boss, first thing he did when I told him I was quitting was he picked up the phone and got me a bartending job up in New York because his brother at that point was co-owner of the New England Patriots and also owned 3 restaurants in New York. Fluties, if you remember that joint.
Oh my God.
Fluties,
Wow.
Fulton Street Cafe, and Pedro O'Hara's. Pedro O'Hara's, which was like a Mexican-Irish joint. It sounds as bizarre as it sounds, right?
Yeah, Pedro Harris.
Yeah, I went to Pedro O'Hara's and I moved to New York, and luckily I was able to move in with 4 of my buddies from Washington and Lee who were all working in finance. So I had essentially a glorified closet.
Right.
That
Yep.
the mattress was at an angle because it wasn't wide enough to support the mattress that I had. So I slept on an orthopedic angle for the first year, but I didn't care, man. Jason, I didn't care. I was in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I spent the first 6 months being a single bartender in New York, sort of just doing that and making absolutely no progress. And then finally, I had one of those all-nighters with a buddy of mine who was from Houston, and he just looked at me. It was like 4 a.m, and he was, he was pursuing acting, and he's just like, "McClatchy, what in the are we doing?" The next day, I went out and looked for an acting class, and I got in one class that was a sham. It was terrible, and it revealed itself to me as that. And
Yep.
it was stupid because I only went into the class because a woman that I was attracted to was in the class. I was learning.
Yep.
Steep learning curve.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I finally I was lucky enough to identify that movie or that class and left. And then I asked people, I took a poll of a number of people because I was starting to go to, friends that I worked with, go to their theater performances. And I was like, well, who would you recommend for this? So I took class with a guy named Greg Zittel, who had taught at the Neighborhood Playhouse with Sandy Meisner and a few other people. And he then left the Neighborhood Playhouse under sort of unspecified circumstances and started his own studio. And it was with Greg, his studio was on Mott Street down in the East Village. And it was with Greg that I learned a seriousness of purpose about being an artist.
Okay.
That's where it wasn't just sort of like, oh, I'm going to be an actor and, make movies. It was, you have to train to be an artist because storytelling is how we make sense of our lives and it's critical. And you have a responsibility every time you walk on stage or in front of a camera. So that was exactly what I needed. I needed that sort of reset of a compass as to, why I'm there. And because I questioned it, Jason. 6 months in, I was like, man, I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life because I didn't know I was rudderless. And one of my roommates had an extra ticket to a play, and I hadn't seen a professional production yet in my life.
Whoa.
And he said, let's go to this play. And we went. It was 1987 or beginning of 88. And I went, and he had 2 tickets, he and his sister. And then my ticket was a lone ticket, 7th row center at the Plymouth Theater. I'll never forget it. And it was the original production of Burn This by Lanford Wilson.
Whoa. Okay.
And the lights come on and it's this loft, right? And it's oozing New York. And I'm just like, wow, this is incredible. And then John Malkovich makes that famous entrance as Pale with that monologue about finding a parking space. And for the next 2.5 hours, it was scorched earth theater, his performance. And Joan Allen was incredible. And Lou Liberatore, as he took the stereotypical gay roommate and turned it into this memorable, beautiful performance. And it kept me in New York. It was like, if I could ever do to affect an audience in the way that I was just affected,
Yeah.
it'll be worth all the challenges that I know that are coming. And I was lucky enough to tell John Malkovich that story and thank him in person years later on the set of Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, the Ted Bundy movie.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, what a full circle moment
Yeah.
that must have been.
And it could have
Wow.
gone either way. It could have gone super creepy
Oh, yeah.
or incredibly moving. And luckily it was the latter because he's an amazing guy. Yeah. So I just went, I just started taking class and started auditioning and doing any play that would have me because I didn't know what I was doing. And, out of acting classes, a couple of theater companies sprung out and started doing things. People started writing things, and I just got immersed in it. And, you ask 15 different actors, how'd you get an agent? How'd you get a manager? You get 15 different stories. Mine was a lot of luck and just being in a couple of things that, I was in a student film that against all odds had like a ton of resilience and legs and won some awards. And people were like, oh, you were in that thing. You were in that thing that is playing down on, 13th Street Theater. Yeah. And then, once you start getting opportunities, then it's just, you walk into a room and if it's the right room and you're prepared, then you get the shot. And luckily things started to, I started to get some work and sort of went from there.
Just kept going 30 years later.
Yeah. I will say the guy who had the most influence on me as an acting instructor for me as an actor, and then also for me as a teacher, I was on a soap opera for 2 years. I was on Another World. I was on a bunch of them, but I was on that one for the longest. And when I came out of it, I realized that it was great training, but I had also developed habits that I recognized that maybe weren't going to be useful.
Right.
And so my manager at the time was a guy named Bill Tresh, and Bill recommended going to take class with Win Handman. And Win Handman created the American Place Theater. He's arguably the most influential acting teacher of the last 40, 50 years. Passed away a couple of years ago of COVID. But I had to go, and they said, you have to audition for this acting class. And like the jackass that I was like, what do you mean? Be lucky. I mean, I have to audition for an acting class? Please. And I was like, all right, fine. I'll play your game. I'll audition for an acting class. So I prepared a monologue from Curse of the Starving Class, Sam Shepard. Unbeknownst to me, Wynn Hanman was the one who essentially shepherded Sam Shepard into New York theater and produced his first few plays. So I walk in, just going, all right, I'm bestowing my gifts upon you. And Wynn, to his everlasting credit, he could see that I was being, full of myself. And he said, well, let's take that again. And he said, I remember when I was talking to Sam about this piece. Yeah. And I just like, oh my God, I'm never getting in this class. But he admitted me in the class, and his feel for actors and his love of actors and his ability to take everything that he knew, because he was Sandy Meisner's first associate, and he left Neighborhood Playhouse because he couldn't bear to teach repetition anymore. He would we were in Carnegie, the seventh floor. Carnegie Hall is where his class was, and there was another teacher who had been at the studio as well, and they had big transoms. The doors had big transoms that were open in the summer, and you could hear the other studio doing repetition exercises. And Wynn would sit there in his chair, and he'd be like, do you know what the sound is right there? That sound is the death of acting.
Oh, man.
Obviously, he was bringing that from a particular point of view, because I know, legions of actors swear by repetition, and by no means am I dismissing it. I'm just saying that was Wynn's experience, and that was kind of his jumping off point. It was an amalgam of, here's everything that I've experienced, and what I'm going to do is divine what you need in the moment. And that was his artistry. And it wasn't, I want you to do it my way. I want you to discover your own way of working, which was really the thing. And
Yeah,
that's what stayed with me.
that's great. That's one of the key lessons whenever I've been teaching acting as well. It's like,
Yeah.
look, everything, don't be a disciple. Everything goes in your toolkit. Each
Yeah.
moment you have play or performance may need a different pick to unlock, to pick that lock. You never know what technique may come in handy. So learn them all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just kind of amazing when a couple of times over my career, someone's been like, I'm Meisner. I'm just Meisner. Or it's all effective memory. That's it. I'm like, okay, but like, what if that's not working? What if
Right.
your
Why?
memory is in, Queens, but you're on a soundstage in Lower Manhattan? Like, what then?
Yeah.
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 No.
Why limit yourself? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard enough. Why limit yourself?
Right. Exactly. So this is going to be really interesting because a couple of your key projects are Shakespeare and Autism and Shakespeare and Veterans. And so to have just gone into, I'm just going to move to New York and be an actor, and you kind of basically learned on the fly through classes and through doing. How'd the Shakespeare bug bite you? How did you get in? Well, first, it's a kind of a two-part question. One, how did the Shakespeare bug bite you? And two, how did you end up bringing Shakespeare into these programs, Shakespeare and Autism and Shakespeare and Veterans?
Yeah, as an English major in journalism, an English major in college, obviously I was familiar with Shakespeare and I liked it, and I liked Shakespeare. I would read it, and I liked it, and I felt like I had an affinity for it without any notion of performance. So I just knew that, and then it was in Wynn Hanman's class that a friend of mine in the class had been cast as Juliet in New Jersey Shakespeare Festival. And so he asked me to work with her on the balcony scene in class as she was preparing. And I was like, okay. And I felt like I understood, like I had an innate understanding of the rhythm of the language. And I felt that it was enjoyable. And it was and once you got the rhythm of the language, and you understood, you did a couple of minutes of research of like what this means and what the context of this is. I felt I enjoyed it, and it was easy to commit to memory. It was easier to commit to memory than most contemporary texts.
Oh, heck yeah. I totally agree.
I was like, wow, that was really fun. And then I never did anything again. especially when I went into film and television. I sort of moved away from theater for quite a while, and which was not the brightest move on my part, but I did anyway. And it wasn't until I was here in Columbus, we bought a house here in 2002 after my daughter was born. She was born in LA. We were living in LA. And we bought a house here in Columbus to be near my wife's family. And so I was going back and forth between Columbus and Los Angeles, New York. And then when my daughter actually started school, I was teaching and I started doing theater again. And one of my friends asked me if I was interested in teaching at Kenyon, not a tenure track, not like they were handing out tenure track, but just as a lecturer.
Yeah.
I needed a terminal degree to make a long story short. And I did not have when I had an undergrad. And so Ohio State has an MFA program, and I had worked with three of their four faculty in productions. And in fact, I knew one of them, Jimmy Bohr, he was a casting director. He was the casting director on Another World. So I'd known him for 15 years. So I figured, okay, if it's a great full ride MFA program, I'll audition for Ohio State, but I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to go outside Columbus to go to grad school. And if it works, it works.
Yep.
And it wasn't even my idea because my wife, Lisa, said, what about grad school? You could go to grad school and then you could possibly have the opportunity to teach. And again, like it's taken me decades to not be a jackass because I was like, grad school? Have you seen my IMDb page? Why would I go to grad school? Like total jerk. And she said, no, it's like, it would be really great. You've only ever had a scene study class, great scene study class, but you never took movement. You've never taken speech. You've never really done Shakespeare. And that was in 2009. And 2009, I auditioned and I got in. And it just so happened that 2009 was the beginning of a 7-year partnership between Ohio State and the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Oh my gosh, that's good timing. Holy moly.
It was, but it didn't reveal itself to me as good timing at first because I was like, okay, well, I like Shakespeare. I did one scene back in New York, but at least I'll get a free trip to Stratford and London. That'll be
Yeah.
I was totally blasé about it, and then I got there and we trained with the RSC's education team who are all actors and then their company.
Wow.
And Jason, I'm telling you, it was like I got in the room, we started unpacking the language in a physically based way, and which spoke to me as an athlete. It was a home for me, and I was like, man, I've really, really missed the boat here for 20 years. And I thought, okay, well, we're going to bring this active approach to Shakespeare into schools, which was what really the thrust of it. It was called Stand Up for Shakespeare was the name of the program. And so we had this amazing experience. And one of the company members at the time, one of the acting company members was a woman named Kelly Hunter. And Kelly Hunter is one of the foremost interpreters of Shakespeare in performance. I mean, I saw her when we went over there. She was Hermione in Winter's Tale, and it blew me away. And then she was Reagan. Was she Goneril? I think she was Goneril in Lear, and also just riveting. And she came over as part of the partnership to Columbus and did sort of what you would call regular performance of Shakespeare workshops with the MFA cohort. And I was like, okay, I'm really embracing this. I'm really enjoying this. And then Kelly and I hit it off, partly because I was so into it, but also I was significantly older than the rest of the MFA cohort. I was in my mid 40s at that point. So I was sort of lapping the field. And Kelly and I are the same age. So we sort of hit it off just in terms of life experience. So she was also doing work with autistic children in South London and beginning to develop these games that would become the Hunter Heartbeat method. And she had the idea of bringing that work here to Ohio State to sort of expand on the development of it, see if there was research that could be attached to it. We have something called the Nysanger Center. It's a center that studies developmental disabilities. So our theater department and the Nysonger and Kelly decided to all partner and bring these games here and try and figure out a research project. So when they first did it, it was essentially just another MFA teaching assignment. And I was not part of it. I was, it was like, here, you and you do it. And it's like 10 weeks, and people really seemed to think it was great. And so that led to a 2-year research project that had a core team of 5 teaching artists. And in that interim, Kelly had seen me in Othello, which was the first Shakespeare production I did. A woman named Allison Bomber, who was a voice and text genius, was the voice and text coach for the RSC at the time, came over to direct us.
Wow.
So my first Shakespeare production was Iago in Othello. And
Dude.
yeah, dude. Yeah, it was terrifying, but the support was incredible. In fact, myself and another MFA actor, we alternated Iago on different nights, and then we had 2 Desdemonas, and then Othello stayed the same. And my friend, I'm going to name him because he was incredible. His name's Aaron Zook, and he had done just dozens of Shakespeare productions. And so we were working together in the rehearsals room, and that can go one way or it can go another way. It can go competitive or it can go
Yep.
collaborative. And the beautiful soul that is Aaron Zook let me steal from him in the beginning, unabashedly, in terms of the way he sort of found his way around the text and the stakes. And then we just started working together, and it was amazing. So Kelly Hunter had seen Othello, and then I did a production of Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo, the Rajiv Joseph play. And I played the tiger. It was the role that Robin Williams played on Broadway. I'm not comparing myself in any way, shape, or form. But Kelly saw those 2 sort of back to back and asked me to be part of the core team of teaching artists. So we spent 2 years, we spent about 3 weeks learning and learning some of the games that Kelly had and developing some of the ideas that she had from The Tempest. She had some games with Midsummer Night's Dream, but we were going to play games based on The Tempest.
Okay.
So that was an incredible experience, being in the room with Kelly and 4 other just gifted teaching artists who understood the power of what we might be able to do. And then we started playing the games once a week with a group at one middle school and one elementary school. And then the Nysonger Center did the research, like testing the kids at different points in time in terms of like social use of language, communicative skills, recognizing facial expressions attached to specific emotions, and then replicating them, just certain communicative and self-expression skills. And Jason, it changed it changed the trajectory of who I am as an artist, as an educator, as a husband, as a parent, because everything is geared and focused on that which is outside yourself.
Okay.
And you learn the games, but there's no real game plan for when 11 autistic individuals walk in with their own unique set of circumstances, their own needs, and it's no longer, and never is, about you. It's about crafting an experience for these individuals and meeting each other where we are and reacting in the moment, which makes it sound like great acting training, which is what it is. And the underpinning is the rhythm of Shakespeare's language, which is the rhythm of a heartbeat.
Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. 5, it's just 5 feet.
Yep.
What you did. And it's how we start every workshop is we make what's called a heartbeat. Hello. We make a heartbeat together.
Mm.
And we sing the word hello. And it's where we all meet, because the heartbeat, the rhythm of a heartbeat is primal. We're hardwired for it. It's the first sound feeling we experience before we're even born. So everyone can feel it and connect into it. And it's the first step right out of the gate. If you want to put a bumper sticker on like what the Hunter Heartbeat method, Shakespeare and Autism is working toward, it's confronting disassociation of mind and body. And that's really a core challenge with not just autistic individuals. Yes, autistic individuals, but we all have disassociation of mind and body. If you're a combat veteran, if you are having relationship crisis, if you're having work crisis, if you had childhood trauma, do you have any other sort of difficulty? This is something that we recognize and can address. And it's about, it's physically based, it's based in play, and it's based in having no real stated agenda other than the enjoyment of the experience. So
That's
that's sort of the journey to Shakespeare. And then once that happened, the first thing I ever directed, because I got hired as a faculty member, having never directed. I mean, they hired me because of my acting career and the fact that I was, a good teacher.
Wait. Okay, say that again. So the Ohio State University hired you on as faculty for the theater department before you directed.
Yes. So
That's amazing.
I I finished up the MFA program in 2012, and I was the partnership with the RC was incredible. I feel like if there was one person who was the main consistent beneficiary of that partnership, it was me, because of the Shakespeare and autism work that I continue to do, but also deeply confirming how effective I believe Shakespeare can be in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
So I spent a year as a lecturer here after finishing the MFA program, and in that year, faculty position opened up, and I was encouraged to apply for it. And I knew that my application would be really strong, except for the fact that I had never directed. And they decided to offer me the position, knowing that I had support with my other faculty members, my colleagues, in terms of directing. And I also knew that I thought I could be a pretty good director. I felt like I would know my way around.
My IMDb page.
Yeah, that's right. I would know my way a little bit around this. Like I knew, I just hadn't done, I guess.
Right.
So the first piece I directed was we had a school tour at the time, and I directed Henry V
Oh, nice.
because I chose that and chose to adapt it to 80 minutes. Because during my MFA program, and I guess this sort of bleeds into what you were talking about before, during my MFA program, I dedicated every effort that's embedded in the program toward creating new work, because it's MFA in acting performance with an emphasis on creating new work.
Okay.
And all of my new work creation was based on illuminating and expressing the veteran's experience. Well, the first reason I landed there was my dad was a Marine in World War II. My grandmother finagled and gerrymandered his age because he was 17 when he signed up, and she just fudged the date. So the story goes, and he was in the Pacific, and he was in Okinawa and Guam, two really challenging places. And he came back and essentially lived the next 65 years of his life with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress, which would have been useful information growing up in that household, just to encapsulate that, not to, and I think that's, so it speaks for itself. And he never really spoke about it. And he retired to Jacksonville, North Carolina. And my wife, Lisa, and I went down and visited him and my stepmother right when Saving Private Ryan came out, and renewed interest in World War II, The Greatest Generation. Tom Brokaw's book was, it's like, and we were sitting on my dad's back deck, and I said, Dad, are you going to go see Saving Private Ryan? Because I knew his best friend had been part of the landing.
Wow.
And he said, Kevin, I couldn't even sit through Raiders of the Lost Ark. He said, there's no way I can watch Saving Private Ryan. And sitting there on his back deck in the middle of summer, unprompted, and for the only time, he started talking about his experience in the Pacific. And Jason, it was like everything sort of shrink wrapped and clicked into focus about who he was and why he was the way he was.
Yeah.
And
Kevin, is this where is so I just as a time, I want to make sure we get to this. Is this where the idea for Scrap Heap came from? Can we
yeah,
pivot into now?
yeah. So
So it's just
yeah,
talk about
so
how where that play came from. Yeah.
yeah. So once I had that conversation with my dad, I was like, well, this is unbelievable. And I need to tell this story.
Right.
And then a buddy of mine who was about 4 years older than me, grew up in Havertown, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. I knew him through my brothers, but I knew him from playing basketball. He's an amazing athlete. He was nationally ranked tennis player, played minor league baseball, and was now a district attorney in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. But he also was a painter and an actor. And he then went into the military after the bombings in Beirut in '83.
Okay.
And there was a new recruitment program, and he went into the military and spent 8 or 9 years in special forces and diplomatic security service. When he came out, he went to LA and was determined to paint and be an actor. And when I first went to LA to see if I wanted to live there, I stayed with him for 6 weeks. And it was in those 6 weeks that I really got to know him and his struggles with the VA and his struggles with mental health and his struggles physically. And Jeff, that's his name. Jeff is who Scrap Heap is based on.
Okay.
Because I was heartbroken and outraged on his behalf in terms of the path that he had to navigate. And so in the MFA program, I started crafting the seeds of Scrap Heap. And the first iteration was like a 20-minute version of it for my final project as an MFA. And then I expanded it to an hour when I had the opportunity because it needed that. And yeah, so that's where Scrap Heap came from, just based on telling his story. And it's a story that he communalizes with other veterans, but wasn't really interested in telling, but he was interested in me telling it.
Great. Did he give you his blessing? Is it pretty much
Yes.
Scrap Heap? Just give us the elevator speech so that we know that the log line. So it's a one-man show that you perform, you wrote.
Yes.
Is it kind of biographical of Jeff, or is it sort of a
it's
collage of multiple special force or VA guys?
It is biographical of Jeff. It is based very deeply on his experiences. They are his experiences. 20% of it are his words exactly.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is sort of heightened and sort of theatrical and poetic. I set up for myself the challenge of writing it in a way that I had never written before and using the device that when regular, in quotes, speech wasn't enough, he climbs on this acting cube and he elevates, and it's sort of his poetic inner life takes over for a certain amount of time, and then he's back to talking to because everything is direct address. So talks to the audience and then goes on these flights of poetic language and then comes back to direct address.
That's so cool. And this, I know you've got some, again, this goes back to that you were named the Ohio State Artist Laureate for this year. Does that mean you've got extra tour stops coming up? I'm going to put this in the show notes too. By the time this drops, probably you have the National Veterans Museum Memorial, April 25th.
Yeah. So with the Artist Laureate program, the second half of it is the work with Scrap Heap and the veterans community. So
great.
The first event is in Marion at the OSU campus in Marion, Ohio on February 25th. It's actually a screening of the performance.
Oh, okay.
We did it at the Wexner Center here for a few nights and we filmed it. So my community partners have the option of a screening of the performance or a stripped down live version. So Marion will be a screening. Then in March the 24th, it'll be a stripped down live performance in Athens, Ohio. March 28th, it'll be a live performance at Cleveland State. And then April 25th, it'll be either the screening or a live reading at the National Veterans Museum and Memorial in Columbus.
So Kevin, you're doing a one-man show, you wrote it, you're performing it, it's captured. I've also performed very lengthy monologues before in plays. I've never done the full one-man show on my own, but I've had like a 40-minute monologue before. I know that mountain, and I've directed one-person shows, written one-person shows. I'm working right now with Scott Mann, who you mentioned, on his new one-person show, writing to direct. And you've mentioned a couple times your background as an athlete, basketball player, and also how your approach to Shakespeare is very much physicalizing the language. So I want to kind of set you up here to talk a little bit about what it's like to do a one-man show, but through the prism of your sort of athletic mind. I have to just assume that you as an actor approach your performance in a very physicalized, externalized, athletic way. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I do approach pretty much all acting from a physically based approach. And the trajectory of that is really interesting because when I came into that MFA program at OSU and there was a movement curriculum, my first sense was, I'm a college athlete. I can move. Give me the script and get out of the way, right?
Right.
Totally arrogant and idiotic. And the movement specialist, Janine Thompson, who is also the director of Scrap Heap, Janine Thompson recognized that reticence in me and then just sort of kept offering all these different movement techniques. Rudolph Laban's technique. We did viewpoints, Suzuki, and Suzuki is so close to
Oh, yeah.
being an athlete. It's like you think you know what concentration is, and then you do Suzuki, and it's like, yeah, it's like the fifth overtime, and you,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
The amount of sweat that came off my body doing Suzuki, I just...
But Jason, it was incredible, and being able to mix, my physically based organic presence with technique that Janine offered in class, and then we collaborated on Scrap Heap together to make it incredibly physical, to sort of point up essentially what Jeff was and what he is now physically, and also sort of what he's navigating in mental health, but to really point up what he was capable of. And that's how we sort of landed on the intense physicality of Scrap Heap, and we're able to detail it. And that was a lot of seeing it through Janine's lens and her really being able to help me detail it. It also, part of it is when we did The Tempest at the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is like the culmination of Shakespeare and Autism, where we did a performance of The Tempest with kids with autism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was incredible. And when we rehearsed, I was Prospero and Greg Hicks was Caliban. And Greg Hicks is another one of the great RSC actors. And Greg would lead us through a 45 to 50-minute warm-up that combined capoeira, Pilates, and stretching, and, spending some time upside down and, incredible, but not really what you would call traditional acting warm-up, but just 45 to 50 minutes of this, but it was acting warm-up, and I never felt more ready to go on stage in terms of being connected to the rest of the people and burning away all the excess armor energy.
Yeah.
Being fully present. So I incorporate that not only into Scrap Heap, but into my classes, into my rehearsal room, a physically based way of doing things, because your corporeal presence is always going to be the most dependable thing.
Yeah. I mean, you're sharing space time. You're breathing the same air.
Yeah.
The audience will... I loved what you said, the armor energy. The audience will pick up on that so fast.
Yeah.
You haven't got rid of it. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can do it. You can do it with acting for the camera as well. You can modify it. It's not like you're going to do capoeira for 25 minutes before each take. But if you have a physically specific thought, in addition to whatever other preparation you walk on set with, that helps you launch into a take. And if you're going to do it 8, 10, 12 times, what is it that's going to make it as if it's happening for the first time?
Yeah. Man, Kevin, this is so great. Thank you so much. I know we could drill so much deeper on all this stuff, but I got to pull us into our wrap here, which is always a spotlight for you. So I got a couple fun questions here.
Yeah.
And then we'll tell everyone how to track you down. That sounds a little creepier than I meant, but let's start with this. What is your favorite story that you are currently reading or watching?
Favorite story that I am currently reading or watching? You notice how I repeated the question to buy some time?
I totally noticed. I'm not going to edit that out either.
Yeah, I am reading a book that it was given to me. It's a series of conversations with Dame Judi Dench about all the Shakespeare roles she has played and the things she's learned along the way. And she talks about her it's interesting, she talks about her intuitive process, but it's really about just how incredibly specific she is, and it's called Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent.
The Man Who Pays the Rent. Awesome.
Yeah, and it's awesome. It's really a distillation of a series of conversations between her and a friend of hers and a guy she met doing a musical. And yeah, it's amazing.
Cool. All right, here's another thinker. If you could ask any one person any one question, who would that person be and what would you ask?
I'd ask my mother what she thinks of what I've done with my life. She she died when I was 15, so I would that's what I would ask her.
Oh my goodness. I can only imagine that she would probably be just as shocked and
That's
also
right.
proud.
She would be, fall madly in love with my wife and my 2 kids.
Yeah. Oh my God. All right, here's an easy one. What is always in your fridge?
Always in my fridge is peanut butter and beer.
Oh, super important follow-up questions. Is that crunchy and smooth and which beer?
Yeah, we alternate between crunchy and smooth just to sort of are part of our charming unpredictability, and beer is often, Guinness and maybe an adventurous IPA once in a while.
Awesome. Okay, well, McClatchy. Yeah, okay. All right, what is the best advice that you have ever taken?
The best advice that I've ever taken is say yes to people smarter than you.
Oh my goodness. All right, I'm sure there's a story there. Where did that come from? That's so good.
That came from saying yes to, my wife, Lisa, to moving from Manhattan to Brooklyn. And then moving from Brooklyn to LA. I mean, I wanted to move to LA. I didn't want to move to Brooklyn, because I was like, Brooklyn, why don't we just move to North Dakota? Uh, it's just another example of my blazing ignorance. And it was Lisa who insisted that I follow through on the MFA program, which sort of changed the trajectory of how I go about things. Shakespeare and Autism is not my idea. It's Kelly Hunter's idea. And I said yes to that. I said yes to following through on producing Irish theater, which I'm passionate about, but I was dragging my feet. And again, my wife, Lisa, said, if you want to do it, let's just do it. Say yes to yourself. But a succession of people who are smarter than me have sort of guided me and created opportunities for me in this second half of my life. And that's the best advice that I've taken. Saying yes to people smarter than me.
That is fantastic. All right, final part of the spotlight here, Kevin. If people want to learn more, obviously I'll send them to your huge IMDb page.
That's right. You've got to
But
set aside a full afternoon for that.
right, exactly. But if people want to learn more about Scrap Heap or your work, I'll drop your OSU page on here too. But are you on the socials? Do you have a website? Where can people learn more about you and learn more about your project?
Yeah. So my website is under construction. I've sort of avoided doing that for idiot reasons that we don't have to go into. But the OSU Theater, Film, and Media Arts page, you can learn more about it there. You can email me. Very good about returning email as well. It's McClatchy.1 at osu.edu. And I'm on Facebook, Jason, but I deactivate my account every once in a while just because people drive me nuts.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even want to make that reliable. I think those two places. And then, once we establish that sort of contact, my website should be up and running in like a month or two.
Oh, great. And that's like everything on Scrap Heap and stuff like that'll be there.
Yeah,
So
everything. Yeah.
awesome. Send that to me and I will add it to the show notes even after we drop so people can access it there.
Great.
Fantastic. Oh, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing all this, your honesty and vulnerability and willingness. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, Jason. You made it really easy. So hopefully we can keep the conversation going and see if maybe down the road there's stuff that we can do in service to the stuff that we find important.
You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. All my thanks to this week's guest and to all of you out there for listening. If you enjoyed or found value in this podcast, please tell at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the show notes. And hey, feel free to send me your thoughts, your comments, your questions at jason@pageandstage.art. I always love to hear from you, and I might just even feature your questions on future episodes. This podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one podcasting app created by the amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. Thank you again for listening. And until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.